Welcome to the Diesel Podcast presented by DFC Diesel. Today I'm going to be chatting with Lenny from Dynomite Diesel and asking him for his opinion on how performance has changed with diesel trucks from where it used to be to where it is now, what truck owners are demanding these days, and then also how the technology and the precision has advanced to a point that we can make more power with less fuel. So I'm looking forward to chatting with him today. Before we get to it, wanted to give a shout out to one of our sponsors. It helps make the Diesel Podcast possible. Kershaw Knives has a 40% off MSRP code for you. If you go to kershaw.kaiusa.com, use code 25TDP40, you get 40% off MSRP. So it's a great way to save some money, get some cool gear for a new EDC knife, something for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house. They got you covered with a bunch of different options for blade steel, opening mechanisms, blade shape, handle designs, and their whole lineup's designed to meet any budget. So if you're in the market, head on over to their website, use code 25TDP40, and get 40% off MSRP. All right, let's get to today's podcast with Lenny from Dynomite Diesel, talking about what performance means today, the way injectors can deliver it, and how he's able to make more power with less fuel. Lenny, welcome back to the podcast. How you been since we chatted last?
Man, we're back. We've been good, been busy, but good. I'm really, it's been the last couple of months. Winter's my favorite season. Winter's been kind of slow around here, but I've managed to squeak about 4 snowmobiling trips here in the last month. So I'm back this week. I'm taking Friday off. Then Monday's President's Day. So my missus has Monday off officially. So we're going to run down to McCall, Idaho again. So I'm taking like lots of snowmobile trips, like extra long weekends kind of stuff. And it's been a really good winter so far.
That's good. I despise winter. I can't wait till spring.
I mean, there's people like that. It's just that they don't ride snowmobiles.
It's like summer's cool too, but man, it's so hot. I'm like, just spring and fall would be my two seasons if I could pick them.
I mean, I agree that spring and fall are both very comfortable and very fun and nice, but man, you got to have variety. Like you have to, when I go to see my daughter in Phoenix, it's bloody hot. And, when the sun goes into the shade and then it's still 100 degrees outside, you get so used to being outside when it's 115. As soon as the shadow hits you, you're like, man, we got to get out of the pool. It's cold, even though it's like still really hot. And then I really dig like all of it. Like, but if it's going to snow, I just assume it snowed, and kept everybody home except for people with Jeeps, 40s, and snowmobiles.
It's interesting you mention that because I grew up in Denver, so we get 4 seasons, and I hated winter, hated just even fall. And I moved to Southern California for college, and I loved it. But you really only have 2 seasons there. It's like hot or just kind of rainy or foggy. And then I hit this age where I'm like, this kind of sucks. It's like the same stuff all the time. So I've grown to appreciate 4 different seasons. It's just, I think today it's like 6 degrees and cold and everything else. So, but I don't really have any winter hobbies like you do. You know, I don't really go out there and do cool stuff that's that's fun. So I can see that.
I mean, you have to do that. Like, I mean, being where you're at, like your weather can be like 37 degrees one day, it can be 60 degrees the next day, and then it can be like 6 degrees the next day. So you kind of got to be ready for all 3 seasons or all 4 seasons in 1 week.
Yeah.
But Denver's cool. I mean, you guys live, 5,000 feet. It's kind of close to the sun. That's pretty good.
It was interesting. We were texting the other day, and you had mentioned something I think it's really important, and it's not talked about a lot. We're talking about performance, and you had some really interesting thoughts, both for like the professionals that are out there, have shops and things like that, but then also for truck owners and how I think their definition of performance has changed from, say, 2010 or 2005 to what it is now. So I wanted to ask you to go more in depth with what you've seen, what your opinions are, what you think performance is.
Okay, so when I first got into this gig, it was like 1998, 1999. I was doing it part-time in the backyard, right? And back then, if you had a Ford Power Stroke, it was basically what they, the OBS at this point, right? And those things were like non-intercooled, great big turbine housing, slow, single shot injectors, no CCs. When I finally bought a dyno in 2000, I discovered they all made about 170, 175 horsepower. And then they had that stupid looking, like Cobra looking like downpipe on the back of the turbocharger. And if you bolted a downpipe on it, just a 3-inch like diamond eye downpipe, it was good for about 6 or 7 horsepower. And then you could put a programmer in it, and that was good for like another 50. And they made, like 225, 230, somewhere in there. And that guy would pull out of my shop trying to do burnouts. They were like 15 feet long. And he was just so happy. It was like over the moon. He didn't break his transmission because trannies are actually decent in them trucks. Now, if you had a Cummins guy, you basically had a truck that was 160 to 215 horsepower rated. You'd subtract 10 or 15 off that to get your rear wheel horsepower. And then if you put a cam plate, a set of governor springs, shove like 16 degrees timing in it, we set them to 225 horsepower because those trannies were trash. And the aftermarket world back then, it was diesel transmission. You had ATS, you had Suncoast, you had BD. Those were the bigger names in the tranny game. And they were struggling to hold 300 horsepower back then. Everybody bragged they could hold a lot more, but for a guy that was installing those trannies, like 300, 350 was really a lot for them. And of course, those transmissions got a lot better and they hold tons of power today. But, really 250, 260 horsepower to the rear tire back then was enough to move your camp trailer and make the average guy pretty happy about his truck. Now, if you're a Chevy guy, you had a 6.5 indirect injection, and they were 150 horsepower. And if you turned them up to 205, they broke a crankshaft or a connecting rod. They were horrible. So circa 2003, common rail starts. I mean, we had the BP44 for 4 years, but still, 250, 260, and the trannies were fragile. So, and people were still happy at 250. Like those things were rated at 215, 235, and 245. And you had to put a clutch in them. If you had a 245 with a set of 75 horse injectors, you had to put a clutch in them. So still sub 300 horsepower, and nobody really even needed to buy a turbo back then. Then common rails come out, and it's AFE airboxes, exhaust kits, gauges. Everybody was stacking chips on chips on chips on chips for pulse width and pressure and all sorts of weird, crazy stuff. We were modifying injectors. We started seeing 400s, like real quick, real easy 400 horsepower common rails. And like back then, Dennis Perry came out with this ramifier, 120, 130 horsepower just on pressure, but it was popping the pressure limit valves and doing all sorts of weird stuff. So we learned we had to back down the pressure. But all of a sudden, people got really hungry, and everybody wanted to be 500 horsepower real quick. Transmission technology took years to catch up to that, to make it reliable. We're there today. Like, we have no problems holding that kind of power, whether it's a Dodge or a Power Stroke or a Duramax. Like, everybody can hold 500 or 600 horsepower pretty easily these days. Then, like 2007 came along, and people started getting into 6.7 liter Cumminses. And then you got the Ford Power Strokes that were 6.4 liters. And those things were easy 500 horsepower trucks, because back then everybody was doing the D, and everybody was hopping them up with just D plus everything else, right? Like, so they would do the D, they would throw some big injectors in it, big turbos at it, and next thing you know, the connecting rods are too short. The motors made way too much power. It was kind of the easy way. In my lifetime, it was the easy time for people to go out and get super rowdy and make big power really, really, really easily and on kind of the cheap. But it was never cheap to fix it, because people made way too much power way too easily and hurt a lot more stuff than they had in the budget. Then, years go by, and I never got into that bandwagon, because I just knew that, it wasn't a forever situation. So we spent a lot of our time trying to figure out other ways other than just, doing that. We had to figure out other ways to make power and make things drivable. And it's not always about, whether it's like snowmobiles or boats or trucks or whatever, it's not all just the end horsepower. You can have, a modest 350 horsepower, but if you're always in the thick of the power curve, that truck feels like it's got a pile of power. And, like the trick to that today is like if you jump in a brand new Power Stroke or a brand new Cummins, the Power Stroke feels rowdy and it makes a bunch more power. Not a bunch more, it makes some more, but they've got way more gears than the 6-speeds, right? Like they've got what, 8 or 10 gears? Is it 10-speed now?
Yeah.
So they got 4 more gears than a Cummins 68 or a Cummins Eisen, right? So they're constantly in their happy zone. And because of that, like that truck feels faster and it goes like the wind. So as people have gone away from doing the D word, now I hear people say, "Oh man, we don't really do any performance application stuff around our place at all because we can't get tuning." And I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, what planet are you from? Because there's so many other things that you can purchase these days that actually have carb and EO numbers on them. And there's a bunch of stuff that you can do without having to remove all the gear. And actually, technically, you can make the gear last longer if the injection event happens on time and the rate trace of the injector event is very sharp on, very sharp off, then the emissions gear will last longer for your consumer. So, if you throw like a set of our eco injectors in something, all we do is we take whatever the maximum parameter by the OEM was, and we target that parameter on the entire set. Because what they would do from the OEM side of things is they would give you 6 or 8 injectors, and not all of them pump the exact same. Well, they can't turn up the weak ones. So what the ECM has to do is turn down the strong ones and make the strong ones run as bad or as weak as the weakest injector in the motor. So our eco injectors traditionally will pick up like 25, 30 horsepower just from being balanced out and matched. And that's something that, a long time ago, the eco thing was something that I pushed big. And now, like all of our reman stuff, we're just basically building that way anyway. So the difference between like what we've been doing since 2015 or whatever till today is we've just got years and years and years of experience of building parts at whatever the maximum OEM would allow. Apparently this week, our 5.9 injectors, the early and the late 5.9 injectors, our reman's passed, and I guess we have an EO for that now as well. So that's exciting. But that stuff is just really well balanced out factory flowing parts. So we didn't exceed factory limitations. We're just at the maximum. Like we're basically 98, 99, or 100% of whatever the factory allowed. And that's what we're giving customers. And there's a very noticeable drivability difference between like something you would buy from us and something you would buy using the OEM test plan and calling it a green check mark. That makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think with performance, I think about it 2 different ways. Like for years, to me, it was about how fast you could go in a straight line at a drag strip, or how far you could pull a sled, or what kind of dyno number you could hit. But over the last, I don't know, it's been a while, 4 or 5 years or so, a lot of the feedback that I get from people who listen to the Diesel podcast isn't so much about how fast can I go in a straight line. It's them wanting improved drivability from the truck. So the OEM setups, even though they're more advanced with the turbos, the electronics, the transmissions, all these things, they still kind of have weak points in either strategy or limitations, like you mentioned with the injectors and the ECM having to basically take your strong ones and make them perform like the weak ones to balance it all out. So the performance side to me has almost switched from what I hear. It's more about how can I pick up a bit more power in this RPM range or to do this, or can I make my vehicle more reliable by doing these things versus I want to hear about 1,000 horsepower build or 1,500 horsepower build. Do you think that's what the shop is kind of struggling with? The typical shop is the old way of I want to go fast in a straight line. I want compound turbos, big injectors, dual fuelers versus these trucks come with tons of power now. Like, and how much if you go back to 2003 or 4 or 5, how much money did you have to spend to get a common rail 5.9 to 550 horsepower and reliably hold it? It was a decent size chunk of
Yeah.
change.
Yeah. Just the transmission back then.
Yeah.
If you're going to take a 47 or a 48 and make it hold 500 horsepower, I mean, what's that, $8,000 right there?
Yeah.
So, and that's before you even get to 500 horsepower. That's just holding 500 horsepower. Our absolute number one seller right now is the old 12 valve injectors. And it's because we've been doing so many YouTube videos, posting them and showing people good data, because people for so long have bought things off a hole size and they've been misled. They've been told that you need a bigger hole to make more power. And it's just not true. So even with my own stuff, we've changed methods, we've changed tools, and we discovered that like our stage ones actually made the most power in a normal street driven pump. And then 2 stage 4s, the bigger they got, the worse the injection pressure got, the smoke got worse, the EGT got worse, and the power went down. So the only way I gained that power back was to actually start advancing timing. And I could, in fact, make more power with a bigger injector, but I had to give it more cylinder pressure to squeeze all that extra fuel by adding timing. And that's not what you're speaking about, is exactly that. You're trying to say that people these days are after performance and drivability, not just 1,000 horsepower to go from A to B, right?
Yeah.
So I wholeheartedly think that we finally have kind of, we were almost like children in the fact that we discovered that we could make, we got turbocharged diesels that make a pile of torque. We did America things, like we went like way too far with that, way too quickly. We made way too much power. We were trying to be like these rebel teenagers to show people that we could do things that we weren't really supposed to do with 7 or 8,000 pound trucks. And now that trucks cost $100,000, people are not going to be as reckless with that kind of money as they would have been with $26,000 with a brand new Dodge truck back in 2002.
Yeah.
So there's still a bunch of them old trucks on the road. And now that there's a lot of companies that refuse to deal with like emissions gear, period, it's like, it is cold here. City Lake, Montana, it's like minus 30 there today. I talked to Donovan and Darren Harris a couple of days ago, and it's been minus 37 up there. DEF systems do not live. Like you park your truck at night, you go back out in the morning, and the DEF is frozen solid. So it screws up the pumps, it screws up the lines. My own 2019 truck currently has a DEF line code. So, I mean, until it warms up, I don't dare fix it, because the minute that I fix it, I'm out $200 or $300 for the part. And then the next morning when I walk out, it's going to be screwed up again, because it's still going to be like, it was minus 1 degree when I woke up this morning. And that's cold enough that it freezes DEF. So we're coming full circle. We've got a bunch of them old trucks that are still living. We've got power recipes that are super drivable. If you and I were to jump in one of my trucks, because I've got a bunch of second gens here, and we drove one 3 or 4 months ago, they kind of sounded quiet. Like the injection pressure was really low, and, it was quiet. But then when you gave it gas, it kind of just was normal 12 valve lethargic. And then when you give it boost, it took off and hit and went down the road. Well, then we discovered that we had to start looking at that line pressure like really closely. And as soon as we started decreasing nozzle size and increasing K factor, so we could actually atomize the fuel that we were being given and get it to burn, the injection line pressure went up, power went up, and the throttle response, it's a lot like driving a BP44 truck now. Super wild. They're just it's been a very steep learning curve the last 3, 4, 5, 6 months for me and Mitch. And we've had lots of meetings at the shop to try and like revamp and redo the recipes. And then we bought a 215 pump and a 180 pump, and then tested our 12 and a halves. And then I've got consumers that are doing like big truck puller stuff. So we kind of have like our hand in all the cookie jars as far as like that old mechanical stuff's going. We've got a half dozen sets on the shelf right now of, let me show you. So this picture right there is actually a picture for a super stock truck that we've been working on all morning long. And this message is from Brian. Brian's the guy on the EDM right now. And basically this morning we've burned up about 10 of our triple feed huge sack DLC coated nozzles because we've been trying to make a super stock nozzle for this guy. It's a 4,000 horsepower motor. So he keeps cracking nozzles, and I know that I can eliminate that. So we're making him nozzles right now, but we're starting from ground zero, which means we're gonna ruin a lot of parts like hole height, hole elevation. The spray angle that he's using in that motor is very unique. So this is all very custom for him. But all of that stuff is stuff that we now have. We've got enough like mind matter, we've got enough brain power, and we've got enough experience that making him something that's going to be really reliable and really good. That truck won't need 37 cans of ether. As soon as he goes to start this, he's going to be like, dude, it never started like this before. And I'll be like, dude, I know. Because, there's a lot of things that we've learned over the last 5 or 7 years, making our own parts on how to make things just work better. And most of these guys, what they're doing is they're taking and just chasing factory holes with great big pieces of wire, and they're covering it up on the outside and making it look like it's supposed to look on the outside, but on the inside they're like dual feeding with 2 different angles that one spray hole. And if they're taking a nozzle out of a elliptical style engine, meaning like kind of tilted, then what happens is the hole that's closest to the piston sprays fuel first, and then it starts to spray the rest of the holes after that as it works the pressure back up towards the needle valve. So in this guy's application, like all the holes are exactly on the same plane. So the combustion process is going to be a lot better, and it's going to be a lot more effective and a lot more efficient. There's just doing what we do, and I want to give everybody in the diesel industry kind of a pat on the back right now, because there used to be companies that would try to do way too much stuff and they sucked at all of it. And now we've broken up these companies into little conglomerates that are specializing in certain things and getting really good at that certain stuff. So, and that goes to like, we've got how many different agencies in the government right now that are being scrutinized? There's too many agencies and too many tax dollars being wasted and all these things. But in what it'd be kind of like if the EPA or the DOJ was the only agency and they were trying to cover everything from, alcohol, tobacco, firearms, to taxes, to everything. Like, you wouldn't have one agency doing all that. You would have multiple agencies doing that, right? And that's where, like with us, we decided we were just going to stay in our little world and get really good with, atomization and combustion and just be there. And I'm comfortable living there. There's other companies that specialize in torque converters or transmissions, or, even companies that specialize just in making shafts for transmissions, right?
Yeah.
Some of the better turbo companies, all they do is turbos. So the better engine companies, you take the better engine companies and they're working on just engine recipes, and then they're throwing parts in there that they trust to make their engine work better as an overall package, but they're dyno tuning. And that's something that back in the old day, one of my favorite people to ever talk to when I first started this gig, David Mitchell, Enterprise engine guy. And he passed away circa 2009, 2008. But super sharp guy. And back then, he was in the super stocks, and he was like, Lenny, they sure are fun at 1,200 horse. You put a 4-inch and blow that into a 3-inch in a compound setup, and they're just a ton of fun. They last forever, and they run good. And that was a full on, super stock truck back then, was 1,200 horse.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you ever dyno that thing? He's like, no, but we put in this much fuel, it makes that much boost. And, there's a calculation, it's about 1,200 horse. And then all of a sudden people started buying dynos, and the performance just blew up because you've got all these little tiny experiments, and each one of those little experiments is going to be like very, very valuable data as far as like what you think works and what works. Those are two terribly different things quite often, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, back to what you just said, I think that the drivability, and not just in daily drivers, but the drivability even in super stocks, trying to get everything just to run better, is a big, big, big deal.
Common question we get from you guys a lot is, hey, I need a diesel engine. I either, I can't wait this long to get one, or normal place I get stuff from it just takes too long, or they don't have the parts in it that I need. Maybe my truck's not stock, or I tow heavy with it. I don't want to go back with just a stock engine. DFC Diesel is a sponsor of the podcast. We worked with them, hand in hand on doing episodes, answering technical questions. They have a complete lineup of Cummins, Duramax, and Power Stroke remanufactured engines that are set to a standard of ISO 9001 2015 standards, which is a huge deal in the aftermarket. And there's certain levels of quality testing, validation that are required for that. So when you get one of those engines, the type of quality that's built behind it, with an industry-leading warranty that's really comprehensive. And the other thing with that is, sometimes the options that are out there, it's a basic OEM engine. You want a little bit more. You don't want to have the same failure again. So there's a bunch of different series of engines that they have, from core, street, tow haul, and also the Speed of Air series, which we've covered on the podcast before. There's a lot of really cool benefits to it. And if you have questions about that, reach out to them. If you don't know the type of engine that you're looking for, if you go to dfcdiesel.com, there's a ton of info there. You can send an email, or you can reach out to them. Also, they're working with Speed of Air pistons, which it's the only piston that pays for itself. And there's a lot of really cool technology behind it. So you can add that into your build and be able to get better fuel economy, increase power, increase torque, and better engine life out of it. Some of the most common engine applications or series of engines that they have with that lead time, a lot of them are in stock, or they have really short lead times. So you can check your favorite retailer, or go to dfcdiesel.com, check them out, see what's in stock, see what you can get. If you have questions, maybe you want to do something that's outside of the normal series of engines, they have tons of choices for rods, cranks, pistons, valve train upgrades, tons of different things. So if you're in the market, definitely make sure and head on over and check them out. I know you said you had a lot of second gens, and I'm going to kind of be all over the place, but I promise I have a point with this. You have a blue 12 valve, right? It's got like 20,000 miles, 25,000 miles. Every time you post that, I look at it and I make like this mental reminder that if Lenny's ever going to sell it, I hope that I have a chance to buy it, because to me, I've always wanted a second gen, and especially one that clean, low mileage, just the whole package. I love it. And I know there's a good segment of people who listen and diesel enthusiasts. I don't know if they'll ever drive a new truck. I don't know if they'll do it. They want to stick to those older ones. And you've talked to me about the efficiency and things you've learned with the injection side of it. It's with the pump, things you can do to the pump, the injectors. And to me, it just hits this peak where I think I could have a second gen 12 valve, and it can be responsive. I know that there's other, transmissions and turbos, all that stuff. I can get quality parts for that. I can have a solid, smooth, 25 plus year old truck that would be awesome. Then I also look at the guys who have newer trucks, which is a huge part of the segment as well. And they're looking for those kind of small improvements, or the way they get a little bit more out of their truck. And I think you really nailed it with what you're doing with the newer ones and the EO numbers that you have and the testing and data that you've gotten from your 2019 and I'm sure other trucks. But it just combines into this where as a diesel enthusiast, I can go back to the mid 90s or I can go to, a 2024. And I had a guy, it was last night, he sent me an email or us an email. It was long and I appreciated reading it. But he bought a 2024 Ram 6.7 Cummins and he echoed what I hear a lot of times. It has plenty of power, but I want a little bit more in these ranges and I want it to last. This is going to be the last truck I ever buy. I'm at this age, I'm not going to buy a new truck. What would you suggest that I do? And so I think with the injector technology and the testing and the data and all the details you've gone over with me with nozzles and the precision of them, it's a really exciting time, whether it's an old truck, a new truck, and then of course, like with the higher performance aspect that you just talked about.
You and I haven't talked about this today, and I'll let you in on a little secret, but so I have we got a truck that we call Old Man Miller because David Miller, he passed away just a few years ago, and he worked for me. So he worked for me for about a decade or so prior to that, and just a great guy to have in the shop. He was genuinely concerned about me and all the rest of the younger guys under me because he just knew that, we were too young and too dumb to ever get through life without him. So he was just scared to death to retire. And I was like, Dave, you know what? Like Denise she's home every Friday. Just start taking Fridays off. Like, I promise we're going to be okay without you for Friday. And he started taking Fridays off. And pretty soon he's like, yeah, like you guys you're not getting it. You're too damn dumb. And I'm like, yeah, I know we're all idiots. That's fine. But so I talked him into taking Thursdays off. And so he was only working Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays. And he'd come in, Monday morning and be like, Jesus, you guys, like, I got to pick up the paces again. And so I'm kind of blessed because when he passed away, at least he was down to 3 days a week and he was riding his Harley and he was hanging out with his wife and he had a good life. But he had a 1-ton Dodge Dually that I ended up buying from his widow. Sold it to a buddy of mine. My buddy drove it and took good care of it, but it was still a 1998 truck and everything was starting to fail. Like it was just getting old and it needed to be redone. So I traded it back in from my buddy and I got it back, put a brand new transmission in it. And it's an NV 4500, brand new clutch, brand new tranny, transfer case, like a nuclear bomb went off inside that thing. And we pulled the motor out of it, completely freshened it up. And that motor ran really good. It was a super responsive 550 horsepower. Well, then I own that low mileage blue truck and I have like this Wagler connecting rod, power driven cylinder head, 12.5 millimeter pump, compound turbo, like honestly, genuinely, that's a $25,000 motor probably. And it's in a blue truck that I really hate driving because it currently has like 30,000, 32,000 miles on it. It's got a Carly pin top on it with like King 3-inch shocks. I pulled the interior out of it, dynamited everything, like everything inside of it's mint. And I hate driving it. Like I don't want to drive it. And it's sitting out there in my barn and I'm just waiting for some rat to go through and chew up a bunch of wires and then I'm going to end up with junk. So I can't sell Miller's truck because I've got sentimental attachment to that truck and I don't need the blue one sitting here. So I'm selling the blue one. So if I walked the laptop out and showed you the shit show I got going in the garage right now, we're taking the two motors and we're swapping them right now. So the blue truck is getting Miller's motor because it's brand new and fresh, 550 horsepower, super crispy. It's responsive. It'll make somebody a completely awesome driver. It's got a really good transmission, 3 billet shafts, Phil Taylor's torque converter. We've got a standalone valve body, truck source diesel, did the tuning for the PCS. So, I mean, it's a $13,000 transmission setup. and the truck's really, really, really good. And I'm putting a 550 horse motor in it because it's going to make somebody, hopefully, maybe it's you, I don't know, but somebody's going to have to give me decent money for it. But if I was going to get decent money for the truck plus the motor, that'd be like an $80,000 or $90,000 1997 truck, and I don't think anybody would give me that for it. And I don't really want to go to the work of building that motor again, so we're swapping the motors right this very second. Like Mitch is out there, he's on his third day of doing engine swaps. So the blue truck's going to be for sale really quick, like probably next week. Just because I have to keep the black truck, and that's just it. So I'm just going to have a 750 horsepower 1-ton dually, which is completely useless. But in my defense, I'm old and I don't like noise. Two turbos plus one muffler is like 3 turbos, so it'll be like really quiet. That's my excuse.
What would you tell somebody from the business side, like one of these shops, if you were, I mean, you are kind of talking to them right now, but what are they missing out on by defining performance the old way versus the new way from a business side?
Well, being that everybody is really content with 400 to 500 horsepower, and being that most of these motors live there quite happily, I would say, no matter what year the truck is, keep that as your target happy zone for all your customers. 6-liter Fords can make 400 horsepower and live there quite happily. Duramaxes live there very easily, very happily. A brand new Power Stroke or a brand new Cummins, they advertise 500 horse and they're going to make, high fours on the chassis dyno. So, if you really want to do your customer a justice, bring them to the 20th century and give them 400 to 500 horsepower. Just build it as reliably as possible so people can go tow camp trailers and do things like that without getting run over in traffic. 225 horsepower is not that fun. And, like so many people are buying high dollar transmissions. And then when they tell me like, yeah, we got out of performance, I'm like, wait a minute, you're selling people $8,000, $9,000 6-speed trannies and you're out of performance. Like, what does that even mean to me? Like, I don't understand what you mean by that. Well, we just do so many brakes and ball joints and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's a byproduct of mileage. Like the more you drive a truck, the more that all that stuff's going to get worn out. Right.
Yeah.
But trying to get a really well put together engine package, all of my stuff, I trust it very well because we do so much driving and we do so much I own an LB7 out there it's a California emissions LB7, stock airbox, stock exhaust, stock everything. And we're going to be using that for testing probably in about 4 months so we can start getting EO numbers on that stuff as well. Because, the LB7 Duramax, like anybody that ever talks about it, they're like, oh, well, they all have white smoke, that the nozzle's junk, blah, blah, blah. It makes me like, no, the nozzle wasn't junk. The nozzle was actually too big and they didn't have any K factor inside of it. So when you start to drive it, the nozzle not having any K factor, there's no atomization behind the fuel because the damn hole was too big right from that was the first common rail ever, right?
Yeah.
So Bosch/GM didn't know what they were doing back then and they did it wrong. Well, it gas tested and they're not going to go back and relive it. But now what I know is if it's a VCO or a SAC, it doesn't matter. If you make the hole a little bit smaller and give it more K factor, then that white idle haze smoke problem is not an issue with an LB7 because I don't know how many thousands of LB7 stock nozzles I extrude honed, but it's thousands. And none of them ever came back for white smoke. All I did was add K factor. So, trying to get the rumor mill to understand that it was just a rumor is a big feat for us at almost all fronts all the time. But we're trying to make parts that just drive really good. Like when I put that motor in the blue truck, 500, 550 horsepower, and it's super crispy feeling with a little SXE 363, it's going to be very, very fun to drive. Like that's a very lightweight truck by today's standards anyway. If you take a crew cab 2019 truck, that's what, 8,000, 9,000 pounds, like 8,500 to 9,000 pounds. Now you take my club cab with a long bed, that truck's 65 to 6,800 pounds. Well, that's a 2,000 pound difference at least, right?
Yeah.
You try and move it. If you move both those trucks with 500 horsepower, one of them outruns the other one with authority because of 2,000 pounds, right? So yeah, I mean it's a good time to be alive for us because like technology, just tools for us. I mean, our staff, the staff blows me away. It We hired two guys last week, and we had to give two guys promotions because it's just too much for anybody to handle. So there's over 30 of us in that building right now. And the two guys, Skylar and Eric, they both are responsible for their own little miniature staffs now, which is awesome for me because it's allowing me freedom, and it's allowing me once a week. I meet with Rebecca, our CFO. I meet with Mike Looper, our GM. I meet with Eric and Skylar all on the same meeting, and then everybody breaks, and we all go and do our micro things. And then the next week we're back together and we're back on the same page. If somebody needs help, everybody jumps in to help that crew or that staff or that part, that department. It's so crazy that there's so many bloody trucks out there, and the opportunities are so crazy right now. If you've kept a good reputation and you've taken care of your customers, there's so many of these trucks on the road right now. You will never be without work. And I see it. Some of our better customers who have really good reputations, really good work ethics, I can go to their shop right now and there's still 25 to 50 trucks. I know one guy who's got 300 trucks on his property.
Wow.
And I'm like, dude, are you kidding me? 300? He's like, oh yeah, because we ain't looking for work for years. I'm like, why do you have, like, to me, it seems very inefficient because if you've even spent 1 hour just diagnosing 300 trucks, the outlay of money just in labor is huge. But if you've bought parts for 30 trucks, and this happened, a buddy of mine in Texas, we were at his place. I was there 2 or 3 weeks ago when I went to the HDAW show in Dallas, and I swung through and saw the guys at Diesel Dynamics. And they were like, man, we had to cut back the amount of trucks that we would let sit on our lot. And I'm like, yeah, like multiple reasons, right? He's like, well, yeah, like number one, liability. I don't want that many trucks here waiting to get broken into or getting stolen or getting caught on fire or getting damaged. And number two, if I've got 30 trucks here and I've already outlaid, 800 or 500 or maybe $1,000 in parts on every truck, my bank account's out 30 grand. But if I keep 10 or 15 trucks here, well, there's still plenty enough work for us to do. And we can get that other truck in here on any given Wednesday or Thursday. So I think that, in the last 25 years, like not just myself, but a bunch of these other guys that run businesses have gotten better with business as well, right? So I just think that the whole light truck diesel industry is maturing and getting a lot better. I've got a lot of friends that own a lot of shops that are really successful at it, and they're doing quite well financially, and they've got employees that got good jobs, making good money and benefits and all the things. And I just love that. I think it's great.
Yeah, I think that's where the performance side really ties in and kind of the definition of it as we've talked about today. I think this part or this question that I have for you, I'm going to sound so naive, probably even ignorant, but I think that I think it would be something maybe a truck owner would probably think, but I think the shop might have difficulty explaining it. And I have no experience with this. I know what it's like to put injectors in something where I'm trying to go fast in a straight line, but I don't have it when it comes to that LB7, that 12 valve, that 5.9 common rail, kind of that truck that's at 300 at the tires and I want to get it to 5 or 450, 500, somewhere in there. What is what would be, well, let me step back a second. So if I was going to do injectors, the way my naive mind would work is I would think, okay, well, maybe I should time it when I'm doing something else. Maybe I'm having the valve lash adjusted on my Cummins, or maybe I'm doing this, or maybe I'm doing that. I think I'm missing the performance difference, the idle, the response, how quickly it spools the turbo, the fun factor of driving it. How would you explain the difference to me of putting in one of these sets of injectors like you talked about with the Eco Series or something like that for my daily driving experience, and not waiting till I need my valve lash done, or not waiting until I'm into the top end of the motor to do it? Because I think historically that was what a lot of guys would do, and I did it 10 plus years ago. I waited till I was doing something else. I think I missed a lot.
So I think that every single shop owner has massive opportunities every single day, because as a shop owner, if you're doing the way I ran my shop was, I'm here to try and make your next driving experience like as perfect and pleasurable as possible. And my theory was, if you leave here and you go to hunting camp and you sit around hunting camp talking to all your buddies and you tell them that you just left Dynomite and how ecstatic you are, then all 3 or 4 or 6 of your hunting buddies, they all call next week and they say, Bruce, he was saw you 2 weeks ago and he's just happy. So, I drive a blah, blah, blah. What could you do to my truck? All right, well, how many miles are in a truck? So chronically, we know that all these trucks, Ford, Chevys, Dodges, at certain mileage, they've got certain things that need maintenance, repaired, replaced, right?
Yeah.
So if you got a second or a third gen Dodge truck with 75,000 miles on it, and it's coming into your shop for a bunch of front end work, it's going to be $2,000, $2,700 for all the front end work to get done, right? Now, as a shop owner, a responsible shop owner, you should bring it in and go, yep, we're going to do all your front end work. And as soon as it's safe to drive, I'm going to take that thing out for a drive, and I'm going to come back with a list of recommendations on what I think that you might actually enjoy. Now, that 2005 truck might have a box in it, a plug and play module that was designed in 2003. And there might be an update for that to make it a lot more drivable and a lot better today. It might have a set of stock injectors in it, or maybe it's got a set of injectors that I did back in 2005 with stock bodies and extrude hone stock nozzles, and they ping and they rattle. And that's all we knew how to do back then. It was the best we had technology in 2005. But now, as a shop owner, you get in it and you go, ooh, this thing's got okay power, but it's a little lethargic under the curve, like before boost. And other than that, this thing knocks, pings, and rattles horribly. So what can I do? I can help my customer by simply recommending that he updates his injectors, get him into something that doesn't knock, ping, and rattle. It starts better on a cold morning. The injection pressure is better because we didn't have to modify the nozzle as much as we used to. The drivability, all of it, everything is just better because, like technology. Like I'm looking at you on a laptop right now. 2003, this wasn't even a pop. This wasn't an option, right?
Right.
So everything's changing. And all these trucks, if you're a sharp, educated owner of a shop, you should know what trucks are supposed to operate like. And it's kind of your responsibility and it's your opportunity to get your customer to that happy place where they're driving trucks that they absolutely love. A lot of people will go buy something because it's newer, but they hate the payment. And right now, the price at the pump, God, the eggs, a dozen eggs is $8, $9, $10 right now.
Yeah.
Life is very expensive. So a lot of people cannot, or they just refuse. They've got enough sense to know that going out and buying a $75,000 to $105,000 pickup is a bad idea. That uncertainty gives you, the shop owner, and you, the old truck owner, an opportunity to drive something that can run as good as today's stuff without the emission stuff. I've got a consumer, a good buddy of mine. He was one of my first 50 customers. Attila was his name, and super good dude, 99 Power Stroke. And we worked on it clear back in the day. We sold him an Edge Easy Box on this 7.3 liter Power Stroke back in like 2000. Put a set of injectors in it in 2000, and he drove the wheels off that thing. It's still in great shape. It's still super clean. He went and saw my little brother a couple weeks ago. We updated his injectors to pilot hole technology with AFM, got him a brand new set of Alliant Power injectors. And he asked my brother, he goes, should we replace that tuner? And my brother's like, no. Like, you have one of the original boxes that was still made in the USA. It's 20 years old, 24 years old, and it still works perfect. Like, leave it alone, throw the injectors in it and go for a drive. And of course, like with pilot holes in a 7.3, the drivability, the throttle response, the idle quality is so much better than it used to be. Did it gain power? Probably not. It's probably the exact same power or within 10, but the drivability is way better. And this is a 1999 Power Stroke. So, this guy, and my brother's like, dude, is he crazy for spending this kind of money on this old truck? And I laughed. And I'm like, dude, if you look at what Attila didn't spend on pickup trucks compared to what I spent, he's $250,000 ahead of me in his life. Because I've spent at least $250,000 on stupid trucks that I don't even own today. Like one truck, I mean, I got, my first 2019 HO was $86,000. My 24 was 105. They discounted it to 91. And my 19 was 72,000. That's huge money. And it's all wasted money. Like if I didn't own this company and I wasn't doing so much like driving and testing, that would be huge money wasted. But I can justify it because like they all get sold at some point anyways. But man, as a daily dude that has, if you're a firefighter, you're an electrician, you're a police officer, you're anybody making, 180, 150 grand a year, buying $100,000 truck's not smart. Not right now.
Yeah.
And especially if you got kids, because those things they constantly eat.
It's really interesting to think. Like, I'd say the part about a diesel truck that scares me the absolute most, and it's through doing like 650 of these episodes, is the fuel system. Specifically, either if I had a CP4 or mainly injectors. The reason they scare me is if there's an issue with them, I'm going to have to buy a short block or a long block, or maybe both. It's going to be the most expensive thing I would replace on that, on that truck. And I think of, looking at them, there's been times I've found low mileage, say 5.9 common rails, and, they're under 100,000 miles, and the injectors are shot. You can tell by how they idle. You can tell by the sound. You can tell by the haze. They're bone stock trucks. But then I think about buying one. I don't want to end up in that position. I don't want to melt a piston. I don't want any of the issues, that happen. So to me, that's the first thing I think about. Like a transmission, I know I could buy a transmission. If something happens to it, it fails. Okay, I might be in it for a cooler, some new lines, new transmission. It's going to suck to spend that money, but it's not a short or long block. So to me, that's what I focus on when I'm looking at these older ones. Is it's probably one of the first things I do, especially if I don't know the history on it and I don't know how many owners there are, how they took care of it, and just the horror stories I've heard of just stock injectors that go out, in time and what they can do to the engine. So to me, that's the one part that scares me about getting an older truck. And it'd probably be the first thing I would address if I did buy one.
It's funny that you mentioned all that because like the CP4 thing, like that is I guess it's common that they fail, but and there are some updates they've done to those pumps to make them not fail. So they pin the buckets, and apparently that stops the rotation of the bucket, and that's supposed to make them a lot better. My local Dodge dealer, because I asked them, I have 3 eco diesels. I got a 2015 Ram 1500. I got a 2021, maybe 22 Gladiator with the eco diesel. And I've got a 21 Ram 1500 that the missus drives. And none of those things have ever failed the CP4 pump. Am I lucky? No, I don't think I'm lucky at all. I think it's the fact that I've always made sure that I've got good fuel pressure, and I put fuel filters in the trucks every other oil change. So if I see any contamination in the fuel system, I can actually address it when I'm doing fuel filters, not like 16 or 25,000 miles later after the crap that was in my fuel has done all the damage.
Yeah.
Numerically, like early in the day, they used to be like this big fear mongering about the Series 53 Cummins 5.9 block. And people would come in and we'd be like, oh, it's got a 53 block in it. And people were like, what does that mean? Well, it means it might crack. I mean, we had 7 mechanics and 2 or 3 service writers, and we were working on, 25, 30 trucks a week. I don't think I replaced 2 cracked 53s. But everybody back then was worried to death about a 53.
Yeah.
Obviously, the CP4s are failing a lot more often than that. But I have to think that people, number one, just aren't checking fuel pressure or making sure they have good fuel pressure. Because I've just not had the same horrible luck. I've had 2 Power Stroke 6.7s spin main bearings and then lock up, but neither one of them trucks lost a CP4 pump. So I don't know, like numerically, I'm just really unlucky with main bearings, but I'm really lucky with fuel pumps, I guess, because I've had at least 3 or 4 6 point. I'll probably had 4 or 5, 6, 7 Power Strokes, and I've had 2 of them lose motors because the bearings rotated. Which, people aren't just running out and rebuilding their motors, but people are worried to death about them pumps dying.
Yeah.
I think it's just fuel quality and contamination, and a big deal is making sure they have proper fuel pressure.
Yeah, I think there's so many cool options that you have. You've talked to us, before about the investment into machines and people, and to see what you guys are consistently introducing into the market, not just for newer trucks, but then also for the older ones, it is really awesome. And so I think, like you mentioned, the industry or the aftermarket has changed to where a truck owner now there's a ton of different choices that they have. And to see the fuel injection side, I would even say maybe even outpace some of the other components that people do on trucks with what you're doing, and the technology is really exciting.
It's it's it, it's awesome because right now we're working on. I got so many cool things. Like I got one customer that flies in from Texas next week. He's big in the oil field. And he's like, Lenny, you're not understanding how serious this business really is. Like, this is probably bigger than your company is right now. And I'm like, no, I get it. Like, what the project is you want me to work on has been on Lenny's punch list. And I've had to buy tools, and we've spent time, diagging and trying to come up with a program. But I just haven't had a customer that's been super pushy about it yet. And he's like, well, I'll fly up next week. So he's going to be here Wednesday this coming week to talk about this certain project. And when we was at HDAW just a couple of weeks ago in Texas, the same injector was talked about probably at least 15 or 20 times in our booth. So the evolution of like consumer demand is always changing. And apparently like we're going to have to get into like some really bigger stuff. Because there's a really great demand for it, and our reputation is like good enough that people want to buy our quality, but in another industry. So we're working on that project, and my favorite project, like I really wanted to build my own nozzles for a long time, and I still do, but it's $3 million to get into the business, and I refuse to borrow $3 million at 10% interest and make those payments. So what I told Rebecca is I wanted to stockpile $1 million. And when we got to that $1 million, I wanted to look at the interest rates. And if we could get the interest rates down around 6 or 7%, then it made that project very, very, very affordable. So we're working on that as well. But the biggest thing for me this year is like we're working on a module that we're going to be able to plug in. It'll have our own injector drivers in it, and we'll be able to plug it into any of these trucks. We'll be able to program it, and we'll be able to send a set of injectors, our module, and have it carb tested for all the different trucks. So that way I've like total engine control, custom tuning per se, but it'll be custom tuned to make sure that we pass gas emissions and can still give people, possibly 100 or more horsepower over stock of all the common rail vehicles. So that's something that, I've already hired the engineer. He's already working on it. Matter of fact, he sent me a text and asked if I got the module because he sent me a sample unit already. And everything about this project is like, we're doing it with nothing but quality as like, that's the goal. Like, we're not trying to build it cheap. We're not trying to build it fast. We're not trying to be the first to market with it. We're just trying to make sure that when we get it done, it is like bang on perfect. And because injectors last 200,000 miles, I need my module to last 200,000 miles. So we're doing this kind of slowly, but we should be drive testing that in hopefully a couple months. It's super cool. Like having our own injector driver means that we can tell the truck that it's happy and it's not doing things, but we can modify that so we have total control over the drivers, and we can give them as much pressure and as much duration as we want, and the truck will just think it's completely stock.
Wow, that's gonna be cool. You'll have to chat with us about that once you're ready, and some of these other projects. I know people love hearing what you're working on, and I think they call it Lenny Hour. I see comments like that on YouTube. They call it Lenny Hour, which is really cool. I appreciate you chatting with me today and bringing up the topic of performance. I think it's huge. It's changing. It's constantly changing, and I think if we can help get other elements of the truck owning community kind of thinking about this stuff, it's good for truck owners and what they can buy. It's good for shops. It's good for manufacturers, and it really helps. I appreciate you talking with me today, as always, and you got some cool stuff in the works, and hopefully I can chat with you about here shortly.
No, I'll talk to you in a couple months, Patrick, and I really appreciate you and all your listeners, man. It's good to hear back from them and have them kind of harass us and tell us what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong.
Don't forget, Diesel fans, make sure and head on over to Kershaw.kaiusa.com. Use code 25TDP40. It'll get you 40% off MSRP. So if you're in the market for a new EDC knife, something for hunting, fishing, around the job site, around the house, they've got you covered with a bunch of different options for blade steel, blade shape, handle design, different opening mechanisms, and a whole bunch of different options to meet any budget that you might have. So we really appreciate them offering that discount code just for Diesel Podcast listeners. Also want to give a shout out to some of our Patreon supporters. Tyler Loewen and 23 Diesel, CUTTERUP Robert, all of our other Patreon supporters, all of you who subscribe on YouTube and podcast apps, follow us on social media. We appreciate all your support here in year 9 of the Diesel Podcast and look forward to bringing you more of the content that you want to hear in 2025. Till next time, keep the shiny side up.